Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back to our old viewers. Welcome to our new viewers. This is indeed Wednesday night sessions, and it, as the saying goes, has been a minute. We recorded a season sometime in spring of 2022, and then life got away from me as will happen. And so we are not coming to you with season 6 until now, here well into year 2023. So thank you for your patience. And thank you also to our guest for his patience. Jared, I'll introduce him in just a second, agreed to do this show many moons ago. And I only finally got it scheduled and got back to him. So Jared, thank you for your patience. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us tonight is poet Jared Beloff, whose book just came out. Yeah.
Friday
Comes out as we're recording, comes out this week. You all will see this. The book will be out, so go buy it. Who Will Cradle Your Head by Jared Beloff, coming your way this week. If you pre-ordered before this thing's even done processing on my computer, it'll be in your mailbox. All right. For new viewers, this will be probably the first show of the new season. Let me do a very quick intro. I intro the guest. They read for about 10 minutes. I ask them 2 questions. We're done. So, Jared, will you do us the honor, please, of giving us a reading tonight?
This is the first reading I've done straight from the book ever. So, pretty cool. And I figured since we're recording on State of the Union night, I'll start with some politics. This is titled Firstborn of the Dead, and it's after Pablo Neruda's United Fruit Company. The sky vanished like a scroll, rolling itself up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Revelation 6:14. When the sky vanished, it was all foreseen on the earth, parceled out, maps marked in oil, ExxonMobil, Gazprom, British Petroleum, pipelines carving latitude, dominion over the earth. Along shifting coastlines, flies helixed over ships, forging new routes, past islands of dying trees, submerged dunes, silt ruddy with blood, bleached coral like treasure or a burial of tombs, homes sinking like rotten teeth on the floodplain. A woman walks within boarded houses, 7 X's across 7 sealed doors. The river's flood thrashes beyond the levees. Meanwhile, an eye of fire ruptured in the Gulf. A wall of flame replaces the west. Meanwhile, the fruit companies sprayed suntan lotion on withered fruit, leaned on their worn bodies, first generations picking cherries in the dark, children cutting melons in the dark, restless bodies rooted to the fields like windswept stalks. And lo, they brought greatness and freedom and comfort for the lowest prices, packaged in plastic and cellophane, their juices glimmering under the skin in the market's fluorescent light. Continue the theme of politics. This one's titled Politicians Discussing Climate Change. Faces stripped like tree limbs or fish lipping the water's skin, bald, scale sore and slow to rise, or rocks that hide beneath surfacing, determining the flow for what we cannot see. An open mouth, a tongue caught like a hook speaking. Supplication sounds like drowning, anger dips under the ebb, a 9th wave. We've run out of names for windswept clouds and coasts battered, our arms tired, tied. I'm gonna switch gears here to this one's titled The Possibility of Grief. The problem is being human, desperately seeking proof of life in the lay of an elephant's trunk, the nudge of a mother's foot against her child's cracked hide lying in drought, flies swirling helixes in the air. What should we make of her refusal to move? Others who keep moving toward the horizon's dull shimmer. An elephant's foot contains muscles capable of interpreting vibrations through the ground. How do we measure the frequencies of our loss? Raised leg, pointed toe, a mother's nudge. Even though you've been gone for 2 years, my mind continues to stumble over your body. The quick pause of surprise, your mother's stubborn refusal to leave your side, lack of sound where your breath should be. When they find bones whose bleach they recognize as their own, a herd will stand in a circle together, faces gray, low moans vibrating syllables, as sun and shadow, like a rib cage, expand. I have to include Sasquatch, so I'm going to go with Sasquatch explores fresh kills. Fresh Kills is actually a landfill in Staten Island that has been overgrown. It's abandoned. It's no longer used, and now it's filled with new growth. Sasquatch explores Fresh Kills. This used to be landfill, now wildling, overgrown, settling layer over composted layer, packing sediment, swaddling root, alive, intimate, suffocating. The ivy's searching hands and bittersweet vines swim the humid air, filled with cicadas static. My foot hits an edge, a plastic thud, a doll's mottled face, the remains of an abandoned car seat. Who will cradle your head? What imprint will be left as mustard grass and clover spread like muslin over loss? I trace these green recesses like a scar's braided renewal, shading our grief, which is also hope, a weave, which is memory, but also love. Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you, Jared. Jared, before I even jump in, I should probably tell the viewer this, that Jared and I are friends, 21st century friends. I don't know. I'm old.
Yeah.
It still feels weird to tell, like somebody I've never met before that we're friends, but we are. I mean, I talk about writing with you probably more than just about anyone that I see in person or on Twitter. So
yeah,
I'll put up front that for the viewer that Jared and I are friends by some 21st century definition. And so it's always fun when I have a friend on the show, because it's like, I'm waiting for the greatest hits, kind of like I know all these poems, right? Like some people, it's like their work is new to me, but with the Jared coming on the show, I'm like, oh yeah, see, that's the title of the book. There's the title of the book right there. Like, it's got to get that Sasquatch in there. And also for those of you who haven't gotten Jared's book yet, the Sasquatch thing is a whole theme, so that's also very valuable to get a Sasquatch poem in the mix, because it's 6 or 7 poems in the book.
10 of them, I think.
Are there really 10?
Yeah, I think so.
I never counted it. Yeah, it's a whole running theme, and it's a fantastic one. Yeah, so I this is the part where I said take a breath, because there's a million things I could ask, but the point of the show is just a couple of questions. We try to keep it quick, so I have to calm myself down and focus myself here. So I want to focus on a process question with you first.
Okay.
The first question is usually something about writing, about the craft of it. And kind of like I was just saying, actually, Jared and I met through Twitter, and we'll chat in DMs and stuff sometimes. And so if you follow a writer closely on Twitter, you kind of get this behind the scenes look sometimes without even realizing you're getting it. And Jared and I also both write a lot about climate and anxiety related to climate change, and parenting anxiety related to climate change. And one thing I've noticed is that watching kind of your process from afar, it seems like you move pretty quickly. Like you'll make a tweet that just says oh, this would be an interesting thing. And then 3 days later in DMs, I get what do you think of this draft? And I think that's really cool. And I'm insanely jealous, because my process will be that same concept, and 3 months later, there'll be a draft.
Yeah.
So how, just kind of give us a behind the scenes. It's one thing I ask this actually of a lot of people on this show. I'm always curious about other writers behind the scenes. What does your behind the scenes look like? How do you go from tossed off idea on Twitter so quickly to stunning draft?
Well, thanks for calling them stunning. Yeah, I don't know. I felt like writing for me with the 2 little ones. I have 2 kids, 2 daughters, and I started writing when we were in the middle of COVID, and they're around all the time. So it was like guerrilla warfare to try to write. Like, it's like, okay, I got the moment, right? And so I got used to just writing like that, and just writing something fast and trying to get a beginning, middle, and end type of structure. Like, I rarely will think about something and start it and then leave it. Like, I write it all in one go, something in all, like it has a draft that looks like it's complete in some basic sense in the first sitting. And then, I also edit while I write. Like, it's like, here's my first draft, but if you really thought about it, it's like, here's my draft that's had 5 drafts within the sitting.
Yeah.
It's rare. Every once in a while I'll have just a gem of an idea, and I feel like I'm not even writing, I'm just a conduit to get it written, and it comes out, and it needs like maybe some comma changes or whatever. But yeah, I think I've learned to trust the feeling you get when it's like, oh, this is something, I'm going to write it. And sometimes it'll take somebody being like, no, you should go write that, and I do. But most of the time it's just me like trusting that I have something. And I'll think about, if like some of it I'm thinking about in the back of my head, and I'll toss it out on Twitter to see if somebody has ideas about it, and then I'll go write. But a lot of the time I'm just trying to get something down to work with, and I'm editing as I go. And but I'm also like, within that, like, I'll write an insane amount, and it's somewhat polished in that time, like in a quick amount of time. But then I'll go, like, I haven't written a poem in a month now. Part of that's like promotional, like all my time is on promoting the book.
Right.
And so I'm not writing. But I have learned to trust that, like, once I do switch back into, I'm gonna go write, like it'll start to come, and I'll do it again. But there is a urgency of like, I got to get it done. Like, there was a point where I was like, I got to finish this chapbook that I'm thinking about before I get to this thing. And it was time sensitive, and I just was writing like crazy, and it was working. And I was like, okay, I'm going to just keep riding the wave. I don't know when it's going to dry up. And I get to the end, and then I let myself dry up, and then I'll come back to something like a few months later. So understanding that dry spells don't mean that you've lost touch or something.
No, I'm glad you added that at the end, because like I always kind of worry. We end up talking about Twitter a lot on this show, because that's like it's kind of where writers interact, and like,
yeah,
it took so long to get to this season that like Twitter's a whole different place now, which is causing, like, I think, a legitimate anxiety among the writing community, because like part of your answer was like, we kind of, a lot of us will workshop ideas in the first place, like in the open. It's sort of like on the, somebody once said, like, having a conversation on Twitter is like putting a coffee house on the 50-yard line. And I think that's a great analogy, because like, yeah, like we're workshopping, and there could be an audience of hundreds, if they really wanted to. And it's kind of weird that way, but I guess writers are also at the same time sort of used to putting themselves out there. It's sort of the nature of the game. So like, we'll just do that anyway. So I'm glad you kind of included that along the way, but then at the end pointed out that the writing will always be there. I get honestly worried about people on Twitter sometimes, because they'll say like, oh, I haven't written, I don't think I can ever write again. I'm like, that's not how it works. It's like,
no,
it's just a thing your brain does. Is like, it might suck for a while. Like, that's, we all do. Like, first drafts are not good a lot of the time, but like, like writing doesn't just disappear. It just, you have to knock a lot of rust off it. Sure. But
yeah.
It's like, it's inherent in our brains. Like, babies learn language. Like, once you learn how to compose it on keyboard or, notebook, like it's always going to be there, for better or for worse. Sometimes it kind of feels like it can be a gift and a curse at the same times, maybe. But
yeah, I'd like it. The language acquisition is actually great, because it's like, for me, it's even more than that. It's like learning a foreign language that you have to, if you don't use it, it starts to like crumble a little bit. I took German in college, and I can understand a lot of it and read it, and but I don't do it very often. And then I had COVID last week, and I was binge watching Babylon Berlin, which is this noir set in 20s and 30s Berlin. And just watching that much German, I was thinking, like, German phrases were just kind of swirling in my head. And it's like, that's what poetry is it's like you're starting to immerse yourself back into either that process or that way of thinking about language that's different than what we're doing right now, right? It's like you're thinking about it in that it's like somewhere this liminal space between normal language and then that overly pretentious I'm being a poet language. Like, you got to find that, thread that needle and find the right way to do it.
I think that I call it knocking the rust off. I think all the knocking the rust off is just getting back into the voice, right? Like, because it's like a part of you. Like, we're all various personalities at any one given time, right? Like, we're also both teachers, right? So there's like teacher Jared, dad Jared, and poet Jared is like, those are three different voices, right? So if you don't write for a while, it's not that you lost the ability to write. It's just that, like, it's like an old friend. Like, you don't see a friend for a while. You kind of have to catch up on things a little bit before, like, things are fully smooth again, but it's still an old friend. So things are kind of smoothish to start with. So it's the same thing with finding your writing voice, right? Like, once you've written enough that you have it, your Gladwellian 10,000 hours or whatever, you just you jump back in, and it doesn't take that long to find it again.
I love that this is,
I shouldn't say that. It might take a while sometimes, but it'll come back,
I feel like we're offering a sort of like, it'll be okay, everyone. On Twitter, it'll be all right.
I
hope
this comes across as nice. I mean, nice.
No. I'm reading it as like you're mentioning our different voices. Like, we're totally being that teacher, encouraging the encouraging moment. Like, because, like, do you teach writing, if it's creative or not? It's like half of the game is psychological. Just getting past whatever block it is that the kid has over figuring out what evidence to use or analyze or write a thesis. It's just like, I can't do that. And I'm like, no, you really can. It's not.
You can't, because it's I don't know where I first heard this. It might have been my own brain. I don't know. But writing is just thinking made visible. Yeah. And that's what holds us up, is like, well, what if my thoughts are cruddy? Like, everybody's thoughts are cruddy. You're just putting them down and you're seeing how cruddy they are. That's the whole point of writing, is taking your initial cruddy thoughts and refining them until they're like, they flow smoothly and make sense and are shiny and awesome. Like, if you listen to anybody having a conversation in the hallway, like, it doesn't sound smooth and cool. Like, it's just conversation, right? Like, written language is very different than just tossed off commentary.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Question number two. So a lot of your book is kind of, as I already mentioned, and you read some, around climate change and the anxiety that can cause. But one thing I love about your work is that it's also got, maybe it's the parenting part, but it's got kind of a note of hopefulness, or all is not lost. Like, we can do great things. We can get through this. And I feel like you have quite a few poems that are kind of informed by that as much as they are by the anxiety as well. Dovetail into that also. Speaking of shows about writing, I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast Verses. It's used to be done by Denez Smith and Franny Choi, and it's now Brittany Rogers and Ajane Dawkins. So this is kind of weird. Most people, like, it's been around for a while, so they know, like, the Denez and Franny version. I actually had never listened to that, because I'm in Metro Detroit, and Brittany's been on the show. So when I heard that she was going to be one of the new co-hosts, I started listening to the show. The last few days, I'm like, wait, there's like several years of Denez and Franny Choi doing the show. So I went back and listened. They had Ross Gay on. It was the longest, most pointless intro ever. They had Ross Gay on recently. You and I both love Ross Gay's work. And he was talking, they used to do this, like, game show bit on the podcast, where it's like, do you want these questions? Do you want to be a pessimist or an optimist? And they all kind of laughed, because, like, if you ask Ross Gay, do you want to be a pessimist or an optimist? He's like, well, I'm going to be an optimist. Right?
Yeah, it's a dumb question.
This is kudos to you. Maybe it's because I knew that we were going to be doing this, but, like, I swear to God, the first thing I thought was like, that's like Jared. like instant connections, like, well, of course I'm gonna think optimistically. And you and your writing was the first thing I thought of. So question number 2 for tonight's show for you. I told you this is long. I could have just asked a question. Longest, most unnecessary intro of all time.
Love it.
I like that your climate work does have a note of hopefulness. It's something I often struggle with. I think I land more on the climate anxiety side than the seeing a way out of it. So in the face of all that kind of anxiety or despair or whatever, I'm asking this question as much for myself as anything, right? Like, how do you see the good? Like, let me drill down. Let me give a specific. Good writing is in the specifics. What's something that gave you hope today? Or this week?
So I started a new unit today with my 9th graders, and they were really quiet, like eerily quiet. And I was like, what is going on? The energy was just so low. And I realized that they had done a standardized, we do these like, it's like it doesn't count for anything other than itself, right? These tests that they take in order to, like, we get some graphs out of it, and we can say this means something. So we did that, and they had done that the period before in math. Once I figured that, I was like, okay. And the moment that I felt more hopeful is they were still with me trying, but they were so tired. So I went into overdrive of like entertainment, hammy teaching Jared, which I haven't done since I taught middle school really, but I like turned it all the way up to 11. And I got down on my knees at one point and was like, it was just like super nerdy, stupid dad joke, and pulling all my tricks out to just get them to laugh or to. And the hardest part about teaching post-COVID is kids' senses of humor are just totally, they don't read the cues of humor in a classroom in the same way. I'm a dad joke teacher, and that is, I think, a style. But
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I live on it, and it was like crickets, and I'm like, it's the same material. What's happening? What's going on? And it's just the vibe is different. So the hope today was that I saw they were trying to be with me, and they were smiling at moments and persisted. And then they got the book in hand. We were doing graphic novels, and they got American Born Chinese in hand, and they just soaked it up. It was like, okay, all my tiredness is done. I want this thing. And they read 20 pages in like 15 minutes and just liked it. So that was hopeful, because persistence and grit is like hard. And that, I think that does apply to climate change as well. And to go into what you were saying in your super awesome intro to this question is, I tried really hard not to be a downer. And I do think like when you were like, that's like Jared as an optimist, it's funny because I feel like I can be the guy at a party, or my brother will probably make fun of me often for just being the Debbie Downer type of dude, right? Like I'll point out something that's there, or I'll be like super ranty about something. And but with this, I think with the book, I personally didn't want to dwell on what was awful, because it's easy to shut down. It's easy to be upset about it, and I get angry over random things I'll see on Twitter, especially recently. I got super angry about that. Like we're really close to a cliff, and and we're still talking about whether oil companies are leading the charge, which is like, no, they're not. They're not. They're trying to get as much gain as they can. So like that stuff is still there, right? I mean, the first poem I read is kind of the most direct attack on that. And there's a section of the book that's like, these are the people I don't like and I blame in some ways. But I was trying to think of it like longevity, and the book is dedicated to my kids. And I started writing it in COVID, in lockdown, and was with them all the time and got to spend time with them in ways that I hadn't. And so they give me a lot of hope, because I don't want them to live in a world that's this bleak pessimist. I mean, this is what's in my heart, this deep, dark, awful landscape. But I'm also like, I don't want that. Like yesterday, did you see the news over the train wreck in Pennsylvania, Ohio?
Yeah.
And they let that gas cloud out, and it looked like the volcanic. It looked just like that. I'm like, oh my god! It also reminded me of White Noise by DeLillo, and I was just like, this stuff is crazy. This is around all the time. It's we had to deal with that. But I also am like, there's got to be something. And we've talked about this, I think, in Twitter DMs and talking over your manuscript, which is awesome, too. It's like deep time, thinking about deep time, right? Thinking about the fact that the Earth is like a ridiculous amount of years old, and that it will continue in that direction too. Like, we're just this tiny blip on a very long timeline, and if we screw up, we're screwing ourselves up, and the Earth is going to exist. And that's not hopeful for us, but it is hopeful for the planet in some way. And so it takes a reorientation of, and that's a lot of what my thinking is, a reorientation away from being human centric, right? It's a lot of the climate discussion is like about what was going to happen to us, or what we're doing, or what's happening to the planet. And I'm like, the planet's going to be fine. We just may not be on the surface of it.
And I'm really going to force myself to not talk too much here, because I could go for literal hours. I am also that guy at the party. Like, if you just said this at the party, I'm the one that will kill this conversation the next 20 minutes.
So the two of us at a party would be really great. You should invite us all.
We'd have a lot of fun over in the corner, like raging against the system. But no, I totally forgot what I was going to say. Just because I made my dumb joke.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
No, I think that's totally it, though, is that, like, I feel like part of his messaging. I'm trying to think of what's the opposite of, like, the oil companies. We don't have a good name for people that want human life to exist 100 years from now. Like, there's not even a name for the movement, like anti-climate change. Like, we don't even anti-klicha, like, we don't have a name for it. But people who feel that way, like, I think one of the biggest ways that the environmentalism is a lousy shorthand way to put it, but the way the environmentalist movement shot itself in the foot was it spent 20 or 30 years making t-shirts that said save the planet. Like, no, the rats and cockroaches will reign supreme. The planet will be fine. We are trying to make it habitable for humans 200 years from now. And if we go down, and unfortunately we're taking a lot of cool amphibians with us, but the planet will be here. And here, you would, again, I don't normally have all these things right here, but a book recommendation.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you know Powers' book. I held off. I read the Overstory only like a year and a half ago, and I'm like, I can't dose. My good friend of mine, Dirk, and he just said the same thing. It's like, I can't dose that much power Richard Powers back to back. Like, I'm still digesting the Overstory. But then I'm actually listening to it. I'd actually already bought it, but my audio hold came in at the library. So I've been listening to it just the last couple of days. And it's very much in the same vein of, like, I'm only a little bit in. So viewers, I'll be done by the time the show comes out, but I haven't finished it yet. But it's very much in this, like, the wonder of the deep time, right? Like, only begin to even comprehend, let alone appreciate how incredible it all is. So if we screw up our little corner, like, the story will go on, and it will be cool, and just be lacking some neat characters. And that's a tragedy, right? But the story will go on. That's all I would
add. Emergence Magazine has a amazing podcast, and he was on a podcast after the Overstory, and his conversation of how his research for the Overstory affected him and changed his life. He actually moved to the original forest growth in the Smoky Mountains. Like, he lives there now, and that's where Bewilderment.
Opening scene of this book. Okay.
Yeah, the opening of it's him. living there. It's amazing. Overstory is just like mind-blowingly good.
I can't even fathom how much his brain is so much cooler than mine. Like the amount of research Richard Powers does just to get through like 3 pages. Oh, I wish my brain worked like that. Like
but he's doing the same project of like getting us to think outside of, like, it's a novel about people, but it's also about trees. It's mostly about trees, and it's actually wants you to care more about trees than the people. The people are the vehicle to get to the trees, to think in deep time.
But to circle this back to being about you and your writing, it's kind of ultimately the same.
Oh wait, we're here for me.
You said though, right? Because you're saying like, well, yeah, I mean, and you do the politics stuff in there. I don't want to. My intro was all about hope, and I don't want to. Viewers who aren't familiar with your stuff to come across as like, well, Jared's a Pollyanna guy. Like, no, I mean, you acknowledge very much that climate change is not a hope-filled scenario. But then you do kind of come around to the I feel like the role of story, right? This is what your answer for hope was today, was your kids were jammed in the face with our societies. I'm cutting out a bunch of terminology. I'll just leave it. When in doubt, be descriptive, not, subjective. Your students were dealt a plate full of data creation.
Yeah.
Put in a situation where they had to make data, or powers that be. And what brought them back was Gene Yang's book, Story.
Yeah.
Like story. Story is what brings us back. And it's also what could bring us through, like, these books like these together, like what's going to get us through the climate emergency. Well, I mean, understanding that we're characters in that story, and if we want to have more stories, we got to address it. And we know that throwing the charts and graphs in people's faces doesn't affect them. Like we need stories. But I'm off on a rant. This is what I'm like at parties. You've all been warned. Thankfully, post-COVID, we don't go to that many parties, so you're easier to avoid me. Jared, any last parting commentary for our viewers tonight?
I'm just really thrilled to have been here. I think this is a really cool setup that you got going on, and I really appreciate the chance to share the poems and where they're coming from and where I'm going, and to hear that you guys are able to hear the hope within it.
Get the book. Yours, Will Cradle Your Head by Jared Beloff. Out. So let's see, today is
on the 10th.
The 10th, February 10th. Online, wherever you get them, order from your local independent bookstore, order a copy, et cetera, et cetera. You know the drill. Find it, check it out. Jared, thank you very much for doing this tonight, buddy. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care. Viewers, we'll see you next time.